Session 4 of our series. We're joined today by Nancy Dominguez-Fret doing session 4. And have you had any coaching with this cohort yet? I don't think so.
Not yet. I have my first one tomorrow. So
yeah. Okay, cool. Excellent. So we'll just remind you throughout this session at the end that we have contracted with Nancy to provide expert coaching to you and your school community. It's like a 30-minute time to really kind of think about, okay, this is our students at our school, this is what we're thinking, and she'll kind of walk you through what might be next for you. So yeah, next slide. Just real quickly reminding you of, yeah, does anyone want to share something they need to leave behind, right? You just taught all day. And just think about your hope for today. Does anyone want to unmute and share anything? This can be personal.
I can share.
Okay, go ahead.
I am stepping into this space feeling overwhelmed and a little frazzled from having a day that's just been non-stop student interaction, non-stop student support, and not enough hours, not enough minutes in each class to get to everyone and meet everyone's needs. So that's how I'm feeling right now.
Thank you for sharing that, and glad you're here. Hopefully you can be present and just the learning, because this is all about like affirming who your students are. So thanks for being here. Anyone else? Or you can just kind of keep this in your mind. Raquel, go ahead.
I am stepping into this space feeling that all the other teachers in here feel the same way, that now all the kids are begging for extra work, extra credit, more time. And I know this weekend I'm going to be grading 400 papers.
Because you want the students to do well, right? Yeah.
Lots of coffee this weekend.
I know. Cafecito. Yep. Yep. Okay. Well, thank you for being here, because I know it's a very busy time. We all have a million things to do, and we're here together to learn. So thank you. Okay. The next slide, we'll just quickly go over the plan for our time together. Nancy, can you click on it?
yes, sorry, I was letting someone.
Thank you. Melissa, I'm going to make you a co-host too, if you don't mind. So like you can let people in, please.
Totally
Thank
fine.
you. Yeah. So hopefully you had a chance to create your linguistic autobiography or map. We had the example from Alegria last time, which was like a visual representation of a dress, which is beautiful. And I'm already thinking about how I would visually represent my linguistic map. And then hopefully you had a chance to either read the article or watch the video. So we'll take some small group time for that. And then really zooming in. So we want to affirm our students' identities, right? And so these are students who either speak Chinese at home or speak Spanish at home and know so many things, right? That L2 learners like me didn't know. So thinking about how we teach grammar and structures in a way that affirms what they already know and builds on that. So we're going to look at some examples from Galería, which is the textbook, again, that we're recommending for the Español para Hispanohablantes. And then you'll think about how you would teach that to affirm them. And then we're closing and looking ahead, and that's it. Yeah. And this is our Google Drive folder. I have it in all the emails for you. We will continue to put things in there, but right now you have access to sessions, resources from session 1, 2, and 3. In that session 3 folder, I put in a link to a shortcut to the linguistic autobiographies that you're populating now, which is great. And we will continue to add things, and I will continue to keep you on communications as we move forward. And today we're going to zoom in. I think I shared, maybe we didn't actually go over the overview of how Galería is set up. This is the Vista Higher Learning text that we're recommending and the cohort 1 schools are using. Each module, and there are 8 modules. And the cohort 1 schools in this first year have gotten through modules 1, 2, and 3. Most of them, one has started module 4. They're meaty and they're very rich. Each module, and here they are, our identity, our cultural heritage, and each focuses on a different region, and there are 4 fases, right? And you start with the grounding text from the beginning, and then fase 2 is a series of lessons that really focus on grammar and those regionalisms and things like that. So we're going to zoom in on that today. Okay, Nancy, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Jill. I'm so excited to be here with you all today and just share a little bit about my experience teaching grammar and context to heritage speakers at the high school level and college level, but also excited to hear what you all have been doing in your classrooms as well with respect to teaching grammar, right? Which is kind of like the elephant in the room. Like, we know we're not supposed to teach it explicitly. Literature says we should teach it in context. Oftentimes literature doesn't explain what in context means or gives practical examples. So hopefully today will help you. You will leave here with some actual examples, and we are gonna hopefully have time for you all to create short activity teaching on how you would teach grammar and context. So I'm excited about that, excited to see what ideas you all come up with together. And yeah, hopefully you leave here feeling a little bit more confident of how you can teach grammar in a way that will affirm students' identities and not make them feel like their Spanish is not good enough or they don't know enough Spanish, right? But like, how can we use what you already know? Remember from the last session, we talked about the funds of knowledge, right? And Jill just said, like, our students come in with a lot of oral skills most of the time, right? And part of our job is to help them continue to develop their writing skills as well too, and their oral skills. But in this session, we'll focus on the specific point, right? The grammar and context. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you. And I heard a little bit about how we're feeling. I completely felt the same way about 3 weeks ago when my semester was wrapping up at NIU. I was like, I can't do it. Like, I cannot give any more. I'm done. But of course, I care for my students. So I also did the extra credit stuff. I did the grading all the papers with a lot of coffee and maybe some wine on the side to survive. And I'm like, okay, I remember that and I don't want to go back there. It's such a tiring time. So I hope you also have some time this weekend to go for a walk or read or just do something for yourself as well too, because the grading will keep piling up and the extra credit requests are going to keep coming your way. So also make some space and time for you. And thank you for being here during such a busy time for all of you. So we're going to get started by sharing your linguistic autobiographies, your visuals. We talked about this in the last session. If you didn't do your homework, your tarea, you are not going to get punished. You are not going to lose points. We know that everyone's busy. We just wanted to kind of encourage you to engage in this activity because hopefully your students will also engage in it in the future. If you guys remember, we watched the video last time we met with Julissa, who showed us in 40 seconds what her linguistic repertoire consists of, right? And she interacted with, like, I think 4 or 5 different individuals and kind of switched the way that she spoke English and Spanish depending on who she was talking to. And we briefly discussed how that is an asset, not a deficit, right? And how if she would have just used standard English, maybe the conversations wouldn't have been as natural, authentic, right? So there is a richness in speaking different languages and different ways of each language as well. And we want to make sure students know that, and students know that those linguistic tools that they have are, once again, an asset, not a deficit, and that in the classroom, we're going to embrace all of them and help them develop specifically their academic Spanish, right? Or their academic Chinese, or whatever the goal is for us, while not saying you can't speak US Spanish or Spanglish in this classroom. You can, but you also have a space to continue learning the standard variety or academic variety, if that is the goal of your program, right? It really depends on what your goal is. So we're gonna break up into small groups, and you're gonna have a few minutes to just kind of talk about your own linguistic autobiography, your own linguistic repertoire. And there was different formats you could use. So some of you guys did I believe the map that Jill shared. There was the option of actually creating a visual. So we're gonna take a couple minutes to just talk about what we have. I feel like that there's only a few. So if you don't have it, maybe you can just briefly talk about the different languages you speak, the different varieties, and who you speak them with. And then maybe later on, when you drink your cafecito this weekend, if you want to, you can get creative and do your own linguistic map. You don't have to. But let's just have a conversation about this, and what do we think about what do we think about creating an activity like this, or engaging our students in completing this activity in our own classrooms next semester, not this semester, we're done this semester. So Joe, do you want me to put them in different groups, or do you want to do it? I don't know if you have it set up, or just put
Yeah, I
them.
can set up breakout rooms. There's 21 of us, so if I set up like 6 breakout rooms, that would be like 3-ish people in each, okay? And so
maybe-
I'll assign automatically, and I'm going to open up the rooms. So there should be about 3 of you in a room, and then you'll see a blue pop-up. Do you see a blue pop-up? Should we give them like 8 minutes for this, 10 minutes?
Yeah, maybe like 8 to 10 minutes. I just shared the link to the slides. If someone in each group can just share your screen so that you can see each other's slides. But once again, if you don't have it, if you can just talk about your linguistic repertoire and how you would visualize it, etc. We just want you guys to be in community with each other as well and talk about these issues. Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
cool. Bye. You should all have a blue pop-up. Gina, Araceli, Deborah, do you see the blue pop-up? Nancy's smiling. She got to go into so many different rooms, right? You're on mute.
Oh, I only stayed in one actually, so it was really cool to
Oh.
hear. Like, yeah, so I didn't jump into all the groups. I stayed in one. So I hope everyone had the chance to share. Our group did a really great job about sharing not only their their linguistic maps, but also even connecting it to teaching practices. My laptop's doing something a little wild right now. Okay, I see you guys now. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for taking the time. Like I said, if you didn't have time to do the homework, quote unquote, I hope you take time to do it later on. So you can also share this model with your students. Say, my profe also has this mission.
I will fight them.
You know, it's a model for them, right? And then they can draw their own. So you can we shared a lot of examples with all of you, and now you have some extra examples from your colleagues as well. But I really encourage you to start off your unit, your next year with that, because then it also lets you know what type of Spanish your students speak. Like in the group that I was in right now, I think it was Jorge that I was talking to. Like I asked him, since he's in New York, like, oh, do you speak, what variety of Spanish do you speak? Is it Mexican, Puerto Rican, Dominican? And it was Salvadorian, right? So I'm trying to guess, and I guessed wrong. But I wouldn't have known that if I wouldn't have asked them. So then that also lets you know what varieties are in your classroom. Now you have this data, you're like a researcher, and you can know what type of Spanish they speak, or what type of Chinese, or whatever language you're teaching. It's just an extra tool for you. Jill?
I'll just say that's something that the cohort 1 teachers worked on in August to make sure it didn't have to be this format, but some sort of like blurb or elevator speech, like how they're going to introduce themselves to the class. Not all of the 6 teachers are native speakers of Spanish, so they wanted to share like where they learned it, how they learned it, who they speak it with, and I think that's really important. So you're real to your students and you show your linguistic diversity as well.
Yeah, and Raquel, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you want to share a little bit about your approach to teaching, how you shared about Spanish and Spanglish, and like how you use that as a tool.
So I don't want the kids to feel like they can't express themselves. So a lot of kids might struggle in saying something in Spanish and they might revert to the English, which is often what I do as a teacher as well. So you encourage it. And especially with kids with disabilities, you want them to feel like their participation is important. So if you stick with that stickler of solamente español, it really takes away from their confidence, and it encourages them for them to come to me and say, you know, how do you say it? And then I can model it for them, and then they repeat it and they feel comfortable in doing that. And I always tell the kids, you could use me as a dictionary. It's fine. I don't mind. And I think that's good. And I even stop sometimes and I'll say, wait a minute, I don't know how to say that. Let me look it up. And so for me to be able to look it up, it gives them that sense, well, she doesn't know everything, so it's okay if I don't. So that's good. I don't do it often, but that's good.
Yeah. That's a great model for them as well. I don't know if anyone else wants to share something that you shared in your group as you were discussing the linguistic autobiographies, or if you think this is beneficial for you, or just really anything related to this topic. I think we have time for one person to share.
Well,
Arlene?
to share out what me and Elena were talking about, which is that like she's saying she came with her formative years of schooling already done in Spanish in Mexico, right? I was born in the United States. I am these kids. Yo soy la hispanohablante who didn't learn how to read or write in Spanish until I was in high school. And one thing to echo what was just said that really helps me is that in the Northeast, we speak Spanish.
Yeah.
Nadie habla en español 100%. It's impossible. If you're
Yeah.
from New York, like, it's impossible. Building, we don't call it edificio, es un building, un parqueo, no estaciones, you know? So I feel like it's 100% okay in this Heritage Spanish class for us to do that, because that is the world we like live in. That's how we're interacting with language. I'm lucky because I work with Yvette, and so there's someone else in, like, we co-teach, so there's someone else in the room who's, you know, not from my same country. Like, she's Cuban, I'm Dominican, so we have different words for stuff. I was like, how do you say that? Or how do you say that? Or, you know, how do they say this in Spain, since she lives in Spain? Like, how do they say this here? And I don't know, I think it's a beautiful thing because you pick up how other people's families and community calls that thing that you like. I don't know what we were looking at, papaya or guineo. Like, what do they call guineo? It was like a weird word Argentinians call a banana or a. I was like, I've never heard this word in my life, but like now I know a new word for banana. Who knew?
Yeah. Especially in a place like New York, right? You want to create that environment. Like, you know, my teachers even use different words for things. So it doesn't have to be a bolígrafo, right? Like there can be, whereas like in you know, previous decades, like students were told, no es carro, es coche, you know, and it's like, no se dice zacate, you know, es césped, like, what? You know, so like this, and this still goes on, sadly, you know, across the US. So it's really wonderful to come into a space where you guys already believe in that, and that's an asset, it's not a deficit, right? So thank you for sharing about your experiences. And one thing I was going to share really quickly, I know that I don't want to take too much time, but one of my friends just got hired at the University of Chicago, and she's going to direct their heritage program, and she's inheriting it, right? So what she thought was really cool is that they have, even though they're small classes, they have like 4 or 5 different levels. And the first 2 levels are kind of, Arlene, it just, you reminded me of what she shared. They use Spanglish, they use US Spanish, and throughout the year they validate it. And so they have heritage speaker like 1, 2, and then they have other levels like Spanish for academic, for business, or Spanish for academic writing. So the whole course, right, they have a solid foundation, their identities have been affirmed. So then the whole course is about how do you write in a professional setting in Spanish? And then Spanish, you know, like they have different topics. And I thought that was really cool because they're still protecting that space. Like, okay, let's protect the identity affirming courses. And then we have more courses for you, right? So like, depending on how much time you have, you know, and it took years to build it. So a program that's strong takes 4 to 5 years to build. Well, I would encourage 1 level per year so that you don't end up bald, right? Because it's stressful to build a lot of levels, but I think that's really cool. Like just making sure there's like even a different strand for that community. Raquel?
No, what I wanted to say is when I give the kids a writing assignment in Google Classroom, what's interesting is when you go into the languages, they have Español Tradicional and Español Latinoamérica. So it's interesting that even when they do grammar check and spell check, they distinguish between the 2 ways of speaking and writing the language.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well too. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so then now I'm not sure how many of you, I don't know if Jill, we should do a chat check to see, make sure at least someone read it or did the webinar, or we just kind of go into the space and try to talk about this. What do you think?
Yeah, can we have virtual hands if you had a chance to either read the article or watch the video? Okay.
Yeah, we
Okay, I
have.
see some hands. Yeah, I think so. I don't know if we want to go back into the same groups. Maybe I just reopen the same rooms if that's okay. And then, yeah, Jamboard, I'll put the Jamboard back in the chat. Frames 1 and 2, I have for folks to capture their ideas, right? The 3 questions were, so Jamboard frame 1, your rooms are going to be mixed. In each room, there might be some people who read the article, some people who watched the video. So it would be great if you just shared your ideas, right? What you learned from the article, you can put that on frame 2, or if you watch the video, what you learned from that, you can put it there. Should
And if you
we? Yeah,
Yeah,
go
if
ahead.
you didn't get a chance to do it, that's fine. You can learn from your colleagues as well. And the video's linked here, and then the article, I think Jill emailed it, but if someone needs it, I can also drop the link in the chat as well too. But I think these are both really good resources for teachers and admin who are trying to start a heritage program, right? Yeah. If what maybe I think we said 10 minutes, so maybe 8 to 10 minutes to kind of chat, and then we'll come back together and have on the Jamboard. So if one person from each group or 2 people from each group can just write on the Jamboard like anything that you guys talk about, just so that we can all have those collective ideas as resources.
Okay, let's say the person in the room whose birthday is the closest, you have to quickly talk about birthdays. You're going to be in charge of putting the sticky notes on, if that's okay. Mine's really close, by the way. It's this weekend. Okay, any other Geminis? Anyone?
Yeah.
No. Oh, nice. Karina, ¿cuándo?
I don't know. Mine was just, oh, when is it? Sorry, Karina?
El 20.
El 20 de este mes. Yo fue el primero, apenas este.
Oh, y yo el 8. Okay, cool. I'm going to open the breakout rooms again. This is exciting. And then we'll close them at 2:45. Okay. Okay. Have fun. Geminis. Okay, cool. Nancy, did you just get into one room again?
I did. I'm guilty. I just got into one room. You like here you have some of the reactions from different groups. But yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to share a little bit about what was one thing if you wrote anything in the Jamboard, if you didn't get a chance to write it, what was one thing you learned from the article or the webinar, or something that really impacted you a lot, or one question you still have, if anyone that hasn't spoken yet. Or even if you want to share a little bit about your reactions with respect to the resources.
I can share.
Mhm.
One thing that really stood out to me with the video is when he discussed, the idea that like of basically how if it weren't for new immigrants, right, our
Mhm.
language would be lost after 3 to 4 generations.
Yeah.
And I just found that to be so meaningful because there's so much criticism, about our newcomers and immigrants and even from Latinos, right, who have feelings about, you know, about the people that are coming now. And it's like, no, everyone is serving a purpose, right? Like even though it's hard now and they're coming in and they have a lot of needs and our students require more support and the families require more support. But if it weren't for them, like our language would be lost. And our parents were there once, our grandparents were there once, and it's just a cycle, I feel. A necessary one.
Thank you, Carla, for sharing that. I think that's so important to even engage our students in those conversations, right? Because they're going to probably hear those like deficit comments at home or in their communities. It's real. I hear it a lot here in Chicago as well, too. And trying to remind our families and communities that we were there once, I think is really important, right? One thing that I did with my students at NIU, we were doing a unit on immigration, and my husband's working directly with with some of they call them Nuevos Vecinos in Chicago. So he works directly with the nonprofit that serves them, and he built a really good friendship with one specific Nuevo Vecino. And he actually came to our class and we did a collective oral history with him, and he was able to share his journey, the reason why he left Venezuela. And it was just, my students said that was the best day the entire semester, because they were able to learn and then share that information with their parents, but like really understand why so many nuevos vecinos are arriving to different cities, and you know, and like it's just like a testimonial, right? Like they were able to hear and ask him questions and really understand that no one would ever leave such a beautiful country just because, like, there's something behind it, right? Politics and all that stuff. So I think we can tell them so many things, but hearing it from an actual person that lived it, if they're willing to share their testimonial, which, you know, it's also a really vulnerable thing to do, right? You have to be very vulnerable and willing to share and open those papelitos guardados, right? Those unrecounted experiences. But it was a beautiful experience, and I think it's something that students should be exposed to, like hearing those voices, those stories. Why, but also there's a benefit for us, right? Like we are going to maintain our language and have access to our language because of all these new arrivals, right? So there's also positives for us as well too. Thank you for sharing that, Carla. That's super important. Anyone else that wants to share anything that was discussed in your groups?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I watched the video, and there was one quote that he said, language is a political act. And I actually put that as one of the sticky notes, because I really, really like thought that through. Like every choice you make in terms of what language you use and where you use it, or like just even the historical background of the language, and like the colonialism and all these things that kind of come along with that. Every choice you make in terms of what language you use and where, and who has more power in a situation than, you know what I mean? Like those kinds of things, that's everything you do with language is a political act. And I really, really like that he put it so succinctly like that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I think he's also engaging your students in those conversations is important, right? Because we still have cases where teachers don't allow Spanish used in their biology classes, math classes, whatever class, right? When it's not a Spanish base, or like just linguistic discrimination overall, racial discrimination. I think these are things that students can also see the connections to it, right? Like I think in the art, he mentioned it briefly, but in the article, Jason talks really deeply about the different policies, the language policies in our country, and how they've caused language shift, right? So I think that reading it as teachers and then engaging our students in those conversations are really important for them to understand, oh, this is why people call me a no sabo kid. Like it didn't happen naturally. This is why I'm linguistically insecure. It didn't happen naturally. There's like a history behind this, right? And then really reclaim their language if they want to, that's their choice, right? So I think that's really important. Well, thank you. We're gonna move on because of time, because I think we have like 1 hour left, and a lot of things to cover, but thank you for sharing it. Once again, if you didn't get a chance to explore the resources, they're available for you as well too. And if you have time to engage in deeper conversations with your own groups at your school, I think that would be really, really interesting, since a lot of you guys are just starting your programs, right? So we're gonna switch a little bit, but not too much, because Sergio Loza in the webinar, if you watched the webinar, he talked a little bit about grammar, and the approach to teaching grammar and his experiences with metalinguistic vocabulary, right? Like subjuntivo, pretérito, and how that made him feel as a heritage speaker. So if you can just write in the chat really quickly, like, what does grammar mean to you? What is grammar? We can just take a minute to write in the chat. What does grammar mean to you? What is grammar? Norms, structure, rules. Expressions. Okay. A complicated formula of speaking or writing correctly, quote unquote, rules, form, structure, the formal way of writing, rules. Okay. So we have different definitions of what grammar is, clearly, right? We're using different words. The acceptable way to converse, okay, standard Spanish, yeah. When you think about teaching, so this, you can just write if you think this is true or false. When teaching second language learners of any language, there is a grammatical hierarchy that teachers can use as they're teaching, like to follow, right? Like there's like, yeah, there's a grammatical hierarchy. So you know when to teach the present, the past, the future, or like, do you guys think that that's true when you think about grammar? Like if you've taught your language as a second language, you have a tool, like you know what grammatical points to cover first, second, third, etc. So just write true or false in the chat. Okay.
Are we doing the Pear Deck just true or false in the chat?
No, it's fine because it's gonna take
Okay.
forever. So,
Yeah, that's fine.
yeah.
We have some trues.
Okay. So for the most part, I mean, this could be debatable, but for the most part, when we're teaching a second language, especially if you're using a curriculum set in place or a textbook, usually there is a hierarchy. And you know, like we try really hard to like just teach the students the present, you know, in the first unit, but sometimes they want to know how to say something in the past, and we're like, no, you have to wait for the next unit. But that's not necessarily how language works, but as teachers, it could be beneficial to have that hierarchy because then we know what to teach. Also, most of our students come knowing very little or none of the language that we're teaching, so it helps us in a way to start from scratch. We kind of know, right? Some of them might advance really fast, some of them might not, but in the beginning, we kind of know like, okay, these are the skills they have, and now I can kind of, you know, build on. Okay, so what about for heritage speakers? Do you guys feel like you have the same tools, like you know what to teach first with respect to grammar and grammatical points? Oh, I saw really quickly people typing no. Can someone that typed no just say why they feel like there is no hierarchy, if you want to share your experience or... Okay.
I can say,
Okay.
but someone else can talk. So I was just gonna say that, it's kind of like teaching an English language arts class. Like, you're not gonna teach the present tense. Usually you just teach them how to express themselves better, reading and understanding, expressing their understanding, discussing, how to add details to their writing, different forms of writing, persuasive, compare, contrast, and you kind of take them where they are. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Kat. I completely agree with that. Okay. However, when you look at if you buy a textbook, even Galeria, even though it's really good, it does kind of assume that you have to teach certain grammatical points at a certain, you know, depending on, on the level. So that is a little bit where sometimes teachers get frustrated, right? Because they're like, well, in the book that I'm following, it says that I have to discuss, I don't know, the present tense with heritage speakers that are clearly already using the present tense, right? And that's where it becomes a little bit stressful for teachers. Raquel?
I think it's also the assumption that if it's a heritage class, everybody's on the same level. And I think we have to recognize that our kids aren't. So one of the things I found in teaching a pre-AP class is you have strong writers and strong speakers, but you have some of the kids that are, I don't want to use the word weak, they still haven't developed the other skill. And so I think what happens is we're not as patient as if they were in an ELA class. So the expectations is they should all be on the same level, and they may not necessarily be on that same level. So I think the way the books are done, textbooks are done, is the expectations is that they are. And so sometimes the way the books are written is they're so boring in how they introduce the grammar, and it's not engaging to the student, that we as teachers have to be very creative in how we do it and kind of sneak it in. So we can't do it, okay, hoy vamos a repasar el presente, o vamos I sent on, and they'll look at you like, here we go again, conjugando verbos. And they're like, I'm done. This is not what I wanted to do. So I think it's interesting is how do we sneak it in without them realizing that they're actually learning it?
That's perfect. That's like, how do you sneak it in without them even noticing that you're doing it? I think is like, if we take one thing away from today, it's that like students do not need to know what el subjuntivo is or any of that. We just have to give them access to be able to produce it, right? Like,
I
and-
guarantee you that every teacher in this room knows the acronym weirdo because they use it for el subjuntivo, right? And I'm sitting there going, why am I teaching you weirdo? Like, are you really gonna go home and remember the W, the E, the I, the R, the deal, or ser en estar, el doctor? And we do all of that because we're trying to engage those kids that we know how to speak, but may not know the grammatical rules behind it.
Right. And something we have to think about is, do they need to know the rules, right? If they're not, because not all of them want to become Spanish teachers. If they're going to be a Spanish teacher, right? But that's our job as college professors to make sure that teachers who are heritage speakers are metalinguistically aware. Not your job as high school teachers. That's our responsibility in pre-service programs, right? Okay, so what is the role of grammar in Spanish in classes for heritage speakers? I think Raquel and some of you guys have already been typing it in the chat, right? Like we have to think about these classes as Spanish language arts classes or just language arts classes and not put grammar at the center, right? Which has traditionally been done in L2 classes. And I think some, the communicative approaches are trying to get away from that as well too, but that's kind of how most of us were trained, right? Like students need to be metalinguistically aware, they need to know terminology. And sometimes because we are not trained to teach heritage, because no state requires us to be trained to teach heritage, we just kind of transfer what we already know and want to use it with heritage speakers because we don't know how to teach it because we've never been trained, right? So I think that's something that is very common across different states. Okay, so what grammatical points do you believe are the most important to teach in your heritage classrooms? If you can just type it in the chat. Or how would you answer this question? Can you answer this question right now before knowing who your students are is also a follow-up question without knowing what abilities they have. Presente, pretérito, tenses. Pretérito versus perfecto. Okay. Thank you for sharing. We'll come back to that in a second. Okay, so I'm gonna, I hope it works. I'm gonna show you a short video of a comedian. Maybe some of you guys have already watched it. It's only 50 seconds long, but it has to do with this idea of metalinguistic vocabulary, right? And explicit grammar, the teaching of of grammar explicitly. So let's see if my Zoom works. And let me.
Spanish is my first language.
You guys hear it or no? Yeah. Oh, okay, perfect. That was really loud actually. So, all right, let's just watch it and then we'll come back as a group.
Spanish is my first language. I'm very grateful for my parents for teaching me how to speak Spanish. But I got to that age where I got to school and I found out that I could take Spanish class in school. So all of a sudden, yo no hablo español. Right? I wanted to get that easy A. But my grammar, it was trash. And I never understood the imperfecto, so C+ is all around. And yeah, there's this one kid that would make fun of me, right? He'd be like, oh, Daniel, how do you get a C+ in Spanish if you speak Spanish? And I'd be like, oh no, Caleb. How the fuck you fail English? Huh? If you speak English. Pendejo. I'm never a fan of Caleb. Never a fan.
Okay, so
We forgot to bleep it this time, but okay.
yeah, sorry, we're all adults, so maybe when you have with your students. But how do we think that, what do we know about Daniel just from him sharing, right? A little bit of his testimonial and his experience in Spanish class, right? And how did explicit grammar instruction impact his linguistic confidence in Spanish? Raquel?
It's what I was saying before, it's like, why do you expect that every child who takes Spanish has to get 100, know every single word? But when it comes to English, you don't have that bias. And, you know, when you think about what we have to teach as teachers based on the curriculum, the number of grammar topics, you lose the interest in the language because you're so focused on the difference between por and para. And I tell the kids, or, you know, Senora Charo, we're going to learn the colors. And I tell the kids, well, if you see a girl you like, are you going to go up to her and say rojo? I mean, is that going to help you have a conversation with the girl? You want them conversing and engaging in the language, and the grammar takes that away from it. It's like you're giving them every day la misma comida, and you never offer them a variety. And so what he's saying is true. It's like you expected him to excel in Spanish, and because he didn't, somehow that makes him less intelligent or less valuable. And that's something I don't like, and our kids deal with all the time. Our native speakers deal with that a lot.
Thank you. Anyone else?
That was my cousin. He used to do that. He used to choose to go to the Spanish language learners. As when I came from DR, I had the luck to be with Spanish speakers, teachers, both in 8th grade and then in high school. Like, my Spanish was not fill the blanks. It was reading Bendíceme Última, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and also the Argentina one. And just Borges. I had to read Borges in high school. It was not like fill the blanks, está and para. No, it was actually literature, like kind of ELA language.
That's awesome. Who was I feel like I don't know who PS is, and then Joe, I think you guys.
It's me. I'm Katrina. I think sometimes we separate a language acquisition class and actually writing things, writing essays, conversing well in a language. And I think when a student asks another student that type of question, they're thinking of, well, you already know the language, and in the class that you're in, aren't you just learning the language, but you already came knowing it. So it's like they have the two classes separate, where in ELA, yes, you know how to speak English, but now you're reading literature, you have to write essays, you have to express yourself. But in a Spanish class, you're literally learning the verbs and the present tense, and like you're actually learning a language and you already know it. So how come you can't get an A in the class? So sometimes it's very hard to explain the difference between the two. And I think it goes back to an article that we read probably about 2 sessions ago. You weren't the main facilitator, but it said that not every Spanish teacher can be a heritage teacher because it's completely different. And because Spanish teachers came through regular college programs where everything that they learned were language acquisition courses. Now, when you have to teach a heritage class, it's like, well, what do? I can't teach the present tense. I can't, because they already know how to do it. So it really is a different lens. So coming from someone who does not speak Spanish or any other language, I only speak English, but I'm the AP over world language teachers. That's how I see it as an outsider.
Thank you. And Joe?
Yeah, I'm just going to put a reminder of our new standards in the chat, and the focus is on like those blue functions, like getting students to exchange and analyze and everything. And so you get it, right? You're leading the work around like affirming your heritage speakers. I think in all classes, teachers are really going to have to think about what they're teaching and why. Like, are you having a student fill in a verb chart? Why? Because when I moved to Spain, no one asks you to do that, right? Like, they ask you to try to express ideas. So, yeah, I mean, you'll make instructional decisions, be critical of your materials. I've already had strong conversations with Layla at Vista Higher Learning about how Galeria, the 5 grammar lessons in a row, are not respectful or meaningful for our students. So, like, this is leading us into what Nancy's going to guide us through, is looking at a sample lesson and thinking about how you would affirm your students with it. So the grammar is important to help them express their ideas, but that's not the focus of the lesson.
And I think Yvette, did you have your hand up or no? No? Okay. Yeah, and then sadly in some classes, in some situations, like students, heritage speakers don't have the option to take a heritage course because some school districts only offer Spanish as a second language as well, too, which is really common across the nation. I think heritage programs are just starting to develop within the last decade, so it could have been that he didn't have access also to a heritage language course. And I will say, with like the coaching experience I've had in just teaching heritage, that there are heritage teachers that teach grammar explicitly in grammar and heritage courses as well too. So even if you're in a heritage course, you can still feel lost when it's being taught this way, right? So there's a lot of different scenarios there. But your student, yeah, I think it was Jill that wrote that your students are lucky to have you because, oh, sorry, there's someone trying to get in. Some teachers just don't think the way that you guys are thinking already, like right from an asset-based perspective, which is awesome for them and for us. So I'll share a little bit about my own research is also capturing testimonials. And I think I shared earlier that I interviewed for my dissertation heritage speakers who became heritage Spanish teachers. And they talked about how when they were becoming heritage teachers, the grammar classes that they had to take were also teaching grammar explicitly. And it was their first time kind of hearing this terminology and kind of how lost they felt in those classes because it wasn't taught in context. It was assumed that because they were Spanish speakers, they already had all this meta-linguistic vocabulary and they understood it. And across the testimonials I collected, 10 out of the 11 teachers left the pre-service programs without knowing or being meta-linguistically aware because they already spoke Spanish and had the skills and the proficiency to fill in the blanks, right? Because that's how they were taught, filling in the blanks. So they didn't know what a presente subjuntivo was, but they could fill in the blanks, if that makes sense. So then later on, when they became teachers, they had to teach themselves the grammar terminology, right? And that's kind of what's happening a lot across the nation with heritage speakers, because these programs, these pre-service language programs, are not designed in a way to meet heritage speakers' needs when they want to become Spanish teachers. And they're also not preparing heritage speakers to teach heritage speakers or just any language teacher to teach heritage speakers. We're still censoring Spanish as a second language, right? Which kind of tells you what students are the priority when you think about language classrooms. Who are we trying to attract? So those are some of like the findings from my dissertation. I don't want to take too much time on that. If you're interested, I can share more about that. But kind of the point here is how can we support our heritage speakers to develop their writing skills in Spanish, Mandarin, or any language that we're teaching? And what I think Kim talked to you guys about and what you read and what we've been talking about is that we need identity affirming themes, right, in the unit. So like grammar shouldn't be the heart of our units. It could be part of it, but the themes, right, should be the heart of it. Like what themes are my students going to be interested in and what themes are culturally and linguistically sustaining, right? That my students are going to come in and want to learn and not feel like what they are bringing to the classroom is basura, right? That it's garbage, that whatever they speak is not good. But no, I already speak a good variety of Spanish and my Spanish skills are strong. I'm just going to keep developing them because there was a pause, right? Like maybe I was in a transitional bilingual program. Maybe I was never in a transitional bilingual program. Maybe this is just my first time in a class, but how beautiful it is that you are understanding everything I'm saying and you learned it at home. Like, so your parents did an awesome job in reaffirming that. Like, it's great that you speak the Spanish that your parents speak, and it's an awesome gift that you got from them. So now let's keep developing it in a classroom setting, right? So one way that that I approach grammar is teaching it, like I said, in context. And I'm going to kind of walk you through how I started doing this, because when I started, as I shared in the last session, teaching heritage, I had no idea what I was doing. I'm going to be completely honest. I used the skills, right, like the practices from my L2 background training to teach my students, and I quickly learned that I wasn't going to meet their needs. So some of the lessons learned was like, you first have to figure out what grammatical concepts your students need to practice or activate, right? Like you have to figure out what they already know and what they need more practice with, and only focus on that. So to really respond to their needs, taking into account that heritage speakers are not going to be too familiar with metalinguistic vocabulary. So like imperfecto, subinfinitivo, like they're not going to be familiar with the verb chart if this is the first time they ever take Spanish class, right? So we can't assume that. And I think Sergio Loza mentioned a little bit about that in his webinar. So creating spaces within the unit in place to address and to activate these grammatical points is a way to help students keep developing their heritage language. So traditionally in the Spanish language field and the research done by linguists in the past, it kind of has been a little bit deficit based, right? So what most of the research kind of showed us what heritage speakers can't do with the language. Like they're losing el subjuntivo, they're losing the difference between, being able to produce the difference between the imperfect and el pretérito. So like a lot of like deficit based research being conducted, right? And comparing heritage speakers with native speakers. But recently there has been a different, like a new wave of second language linguists that are trying to conduct research that's telling us what students can do and kind of trying to give us tools on how we can help them improve, right? The skills they already have. So these specific researchers, Perez, Cortes et al., and Putman and Sanchez, who are linguists, found that the different types of input that heritage speakers have access to results in reduced activation. So in their brains, students already have the same grammar that a native speaker would have, right? But a native speaker that grows up in Mexico, for example, and goes to school in Mexico is getting input not only at home, but at school. And it's using it in the post office, it's using it every day, all day with different people, right? So they're practicing this, all the input they're receiving is a lot, and then they're also practicing, right, the output. When you think about a heritage speaker, they also have those structures, grammatical structures, right, in their brains already, but compare the input that they're receiving to the one that a native speaker in Mexico is receiving, right? So they already probably have access to the subjuntivo, but how many times are they actually using it, right, or hearing it? Depending on how many hours that you listen to it at home, maybe not a lot, right? So our job as teachers is like starting from there, like, okay, they already have all these grammatical points. How can we give them more input to like activate it, right? To reactivate it, and then for them to be able to use it in a way that it makes sense to them, not filling in the blanks, but in context, right? To create that environment so that they could actually receive the input and reactivate. Are we still together there? Okay. So in other words, heritage speakers have the language, but not always successful with producing it on the spot, right? Like the subjuntivo is somewhere in there, right? But we have to activate it and give them opportunities to practice, to receive input, but then also to, produce the output in our classes, right? With the grammatical points that they need the help with. For example, do we think that most heritage speakers need us to teach them el presente simple? Honestly? Probably not, right? Because a lot of them come in being able to talk about el presente, right? So just thinking about that, right? Like if we see it in a textbook, maybe we can just skip it if our students already know it, because we're gonna lose them. They don't need to know the conjugation charts and like all that stuff, depending on their proficiency level, right? So I'm gonna kind of walk you through what I did with my Heritage 1 students. If you remember from the last session, I shared that when I was at the high school that I was working at in Bolingbrook, we had 4 levels. So our first level was for receptive bilingual. So our students understood everything, basically, we said, but they struggled a little bit with producing it, right? So this idea, like they already had the grammar in their brains, but the input they received was very limited. And then they had very limited opportunities to actually produce the language. Then we had level 2, 3, and 4, and our 4s were like mixed with native speakers, and their proficiency levels were like advanced, right? Like those students, it was more like, even though we didn't have AP, we did a lot of novels and a lot of, kind of like an AP model course. So with this Heritage 1 students, I will share that no one wanted to teach this class. I heard teachers saying like, these students don't care about Spanish, like they don't even try to practice it, like very deficit comments about them. And it actually turned out to be my favorite class. I still keep in contact with some of those students. And it was my favorite because I saw the growth, right, throughout the beginning of the school year until the end of the school year. So what we did for this class when we restructured the program is we asked our students, we surveyed them the first week of school, and we asked them, hey, because we didn't have curriculum, so we had to start from scratch. So we asked them, what would you want to learn about? And they said different things, right? So we couldn't do all the 10 things that they asked us to do, but we chose 4, the ones that had the most sort of comments from students that they wanted to learn about. And the first unit was about their identity. And we chose La Casa on Mango Street. I think if you can just raise your hand virtually if you have read this novel. I think most of us have read it in English or Spanish. I'm in Illinois, so it was really relevant. This was like 8 years ago, right? So it was really relevant to our context and to my students specifically. And it was very accessible because if you read this book, you know that the chapters are really short. And the language is pretty simple as well too. So our goal was for our students to read a book and feel proud that they read a book in Spanish, right? So we read the Spanish version. So this is the novel that we use for our unit, Nuestra Identidad. And I'm not going to go through this, but you can see that we were following AP themes, our essential questions, and then some of the focus questions that we had for our unit. The focus of the lesson that I'm going to share with you today was the actual chapter called La Casa en Mango Street, where Esperanza talks about where she has lived throughout her childhood, the house of her dreams, right? And then the actual Casa en Mango Street. Okay, so the way that I started this before this chapter, this was a campanazo, a bell ringer. I just wanted students to describe the houses you see here on the screen, because I wanted to know what vocab they were familiar with already, because I didn't know them that well. And then what vocab they had, so I didn't have to repeat it, right? So once again, we are researchers, so we're trying to figure out what do they already know, what are their funds of knowledge, and how can I help them? So I also was wondering, because I had heard some of them saying like el casa or things like that. I wanted to know if it was just one student, 2 students, or if most of my students needed help with noun and adjective agreement. I didn't want to teach a lesson on that if only 1 or 2 needed it, because then I could just differentiate for them and talk to them about it. So I was trying to collect data to see if I should teach this grammatical point or not. So this is the chapter. We're not going to read it. We don't have time, but I think most of you guys have read it. And I kind of did a little brief summary right now, but you have it there. The focus of this specific activity I'm going to share is this section where she talks about La Casa en Mango Street and describes it, right? Because it's like the opposite of her dream house, but she talks about how many rooms there are, where it gives us a space for that gender non-agreement. So this is some sort of the vocab list that we created based on what they already know, because we wanted them to translate some words that they already know so they could be proud that they knew some of the words, and then some words that they weren't too familiar with. Like they knew escaleras, but not like interiores, exteriores. Some of them, I remember techo, they called it rufa, I think it was, like the Spanglish version of it. So we taught them techo as well too, like to compare and contrast it. So there was some words that they knew and some words that they didn't mix in this vocab list. And then the next day, I asked them to just write 5 sentences about this specific image to once again collect data. Like, do I need to teach them this or not? And I was here starting to notice that more students were saying like, I don't know, like los escaleras or things like that, which is kind of common because once again, they had reduced input, right? But I wanted to make sure. But we also did, I think this is something that someone mentioned earlier, not only, I didn't want to like let the grammar take over, so I also had them compare and contrast, right? Like it's still a Spanish language arts class, so we did activities like this one. And this is where it gets sort of to where I already knew they needed the help. So then I asked them to write. I wanted them to write about their actual house. The bell ringers are really quick activities, so I asked them to complete this activity and just really quickly write about their house. And I gave them some vocab there, some questions. And then that was a bell ringer. And then I gave them an actual assignment. So you have to write 3 paragraphs. I didn't say how many sentences per paragraph. They did ask me how many sentences. And I said, write as much as you can. You know, students are always going to ask. So I just said, write as much as you can. You're not going to get penalized. I just want to learn about your house. So here you have the 3 different paragraphs and questions I asked them. They were going to trigger, they were going to have to do the gender non-agreement, right? But I wasn't telling them there, like fill in the blanks or none of that. So then they wrote their descripciones de su casa. And then I, as a teacher, you know, asked myself this question, are there any patterns? So we talked about grammar earlier, and some of you guys said rules. I used to say rules, and now I think about it more as patterns, and I tell students they're patterns because for most of the time, they're going to follow, like you're going to see this pattern, but there are exceptions to those patterns, right? So instead of thinking about rules. So then I, as a, you know, teacher, researcher, I was trying to figure out if they needed this noun adjective agreement lesson or not. And they did. So then the next day after they wrote their essays and they turned them in, these are drafts, I gave them a bell ringer like this, and then I asked them to choose the best option. And then I was 100% sure that they needed the help. So what I did was I came back the following day and I told them that I wrote my own description of my house as well too, but that I was really tired because I drove an hour each way to work. And that by the time I typed up my essay, I was pretty sure I made a lot of, I told them errores, right? So I said, can you guys find the mistakes I made? And they were like, what? We get to tell you what you did wrong? They were super excited about it. And they worked in partners. So then they had to underline any mistakes that they found in my own description of my house. So not theirs, but mine, right? They were super excited. I had never seen them so excited to find mistakes. And I asked them to read it out loud. Read it with your partner out loud, because sometimes you could hear it more than when you read it, right? So they did that. And they were, you know, most of the students were able to find most of my quote unquote mistakes that I put there on purpose. And then I asked them, okay, at the second part was, can you write a rule to help me not make those mistakes in the future? Because I'm tired, I need some rules or something to help me, right? And most of the groups were able to come up with these three, like simple rules, right? You can see them on the screen, right? Like that most of our upper level heritage speakers probably would already have, but they didn't have. So for example, I'm gonna read the first one. If a noun ends in an A, like casa, the adjective describing it, or some of them use the thing describing it, the word describing it, right? Ends in an A as well. And, you know, and then we talked about how there's exceptions. But for right now, this is all I need you to focus on, these 3 points, because we don't want grammar to take over it, right? So now you know those things. And then I asked them, okay, then I took 2 minutes to explain the rules, right? 2 minutes, timer, let's go. We explained them. We moved on. And then I said, okay, so now you corrected my rules. Now you have some rules or patterns. So now go back to your own essay and then find, you know, see if there are any things that you need to fix based on what we just talked about. And then they did that, right? And then after that, I asked them to do the final draft. That was just a draft. So then I asked them to do, and then you can see the drafts, the final draft here. I asked them to also draw their houses from the inside and the outside, and then write their final essay on that paper as well too, right? So they were able to do this all in context without me ever telling them to fill in the blank or really asking or demanding for them to use metalinguistic vocabulary, right? And we did this for the preterite and imperfect as well too, with the same book, because there was chapters that just kind of let us use that or practice that skill. And my students did not leave the classroom knowing the rules, the differences between the preterite and imperfect, but they found patterns that were helpful for them. If you read these examples closely, you will see that there's still some other like grammatical, quote unquote, I don't want to call them mistakes, but you know, stuff that they had to work on. I did not put any red marks because that was not what I was focusing on. So I had a rule that I was only gonna grade the grammar that I had covered. Like if I hadn't covered that accent mark or like that rule or pattern, I was not gonna take off points, right? Sometimes I underline it, but I don't want to make them responsible for something that I haven't taught them. So that's what I did there. And then I don't know if I'm gonna pause here. Does anyone have any questions or comments about this before we move on?
Yeah, I was wondering about, in one of your slides, I believe that you had the kids just writing the words that they knew when you had the pictures of the different houses and you were asking them to say a word or say a sentence about the places. If a student said, for example, you mentioned el escalera, do you say it back to them, la escalera? Or do
Yeah,
you
so I would always do a recast. I do that with my kids all the time too, because I have heard my kids are third generation. So I always do the recast, right? Like, oh, see, last, and they know what I'm doing. My kids are like, I know what you mean, but you know, I'm like, well, I'm not gonna tell you that that's wrong, but I would, yeah, to provide them with the input, right? That's what you're saying. So like, yeah, I always do that. But I don't tell them that I don't say like, no se dice así. I just say, oh, sí, la escalera. And like, kind of, you know, my pitch, everything like sounds different and hoping that they hear it. But in this case, we spent almost a week doing this project, but they were really proud of it. We did different activities, right, where they had to find like it. They were really proud of it, and I kept, and so one thing I will say is I kept reminding them in the future, right, like now you're responsible for this. You know, I didn't call it gender non-agreement, but you're responsible for this in your writing. Like you can lose points if you don't apply these patterns or rules in the future, because we spend so much time covering them. So like I had to kind of remind them, because sometimes they just forget, right? So like, no, this is part of the rubric now, that when we're moving forward, how we're grading. But yeah, that's how I approach it. Okay. So I'm just gonna, really quickly here, as I shared, my dissertation was interviewing teachers who are heritage speakers. And this is, we talked about grammar and context and teaching grammar as well too. And most of my participants said that they also did not care or mind if their students knew the meta-linguistic vocabulary, that they just wanted them to use it, to be able to use it, right? Well, I think some of you guys have mentioned this already. Lola and Frank were, when I interviewed them, it was really funny, and like you could tell that they have so much experience, because they would just like, I would tell them like, okay, how would you teach this grammatical point? And they would just tell me, and it was always something funny. Like they would always do really fun activities with their students. And this specific one with the conditional, she said, you know, I never asked them to fill in the blank with the conditional. I just asked them questions like, ¿qué harías si estás en el baño y no hay toilet paper? You know, and then like, then they get into the conversation, right? And students start laughing, because she put like, one of the students said, oh, I would just take off my sock and clean myself with the sock, and everybody started laughing. But she's like, but they're using the conditional. And like, then if they're all using it, then I move on, and I don't, I don't have to go explain all the rules, because they're already using it. If they're not using it, I'm going to create a context where they have to use it, right? They talked about speed dating. For example, Frank here talked about like, if I'm going to I want to talk about the subjunctive, I'm not going to tell them to fill in the blanks. I'm going to maybe, talk about going to the doctor and recomendaciones del doctor, right? So like creating it in a way that students don't even know that you're going over it. I think someone mentioned that, right? You just kind of sneak it in, and then if they need it, you provide the input, and so they can provide the output. But if they don't, you just kind of move on to the next topic. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it doesn't, grammar is not the center, but just part of your unit if you need to teach it. So just really quickly, just to kind of wrap up this sort of theme, is teaching grammar to all two learners is different than teaching it to heritage speakers. Although like the way that I approached, and this is a whole other topic, teaching grammar to all two speakers is also, it could be very similar to what I just shared as well too. But it's also different, right? Because the classroom community is different. But I think someone else shared earlier, I think it was Raquel, that even with L2 learners, you don't want them to like memorize colors. Like they can't go ask a girl for their number if they're interested in her with the colors, right? Like, or they can't say she's beautiful with the colors, but you're teaching them phrases where they can actually communicate with individuals. And I will share that although this is kind of like bad news, right? You can create an awesome unit to teach students gender non-agreement. And what happened to me can happen to you. I used it the 1 year. The next year, my heritage speakers, my level 1, didn't need it. So I skipped the grammar lesson. I just kind of went on. But the following year they did. So I had my toolkit, right? I had my toolkit, and if I needed it, I used it. If not, I just kind of continued with the book and the Spanish language art class, but skipped the grammatical lesson, right? So I think the lesson here is like only teach grammar if your students really need it. If they don't need it, skip it and move on, right? And design curriculum based on unit themes, not grammatical points. Any questions up to here? Okay. Pardon. So now, I think we have time. Do we have time, Julia? I think we have time.
Yeah.
You guys have some time. I think maybe, I don't know, 15 or 10 minutes. How much time do you need, Joe, at the end?
I
Like
can do it in 5 minutes.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, so you guys will probably have like 12 minutes instead of 15. Typical teacher move. Okay, so now what you guys are gonna do is I'm gonna show you a Galeria lesson, right? Like Galeria, like Joe said, has really good resources, like the texts are rich, but where they lack is the grammar, the teaching of grammar, which is I think most textbooks, honestly. I haven't found a Heritage or L2 book that I love the way they approach grammar yet. But what you're gonna do is you're gonna look at the sort of handout that there are 2 pages where like they approach teaching a grammatical point. And then in your group, you're gonna come up with a short, really short activity. Think about like a bell ringer, okay? Where you're like teaching the students that grammatical point, if that, does that make sense? So not like a whole lesson, but think about a bell ringer or a really short activity where students can practice that grammatical point in context without you telling them, oh, este es el presente simple or el presente continuo, but you're just, you know, teaching it in context. Yes? ¿Sí? ¿Preguntas? ¿Dudas? So I am going to drop the Google Slides and I'm going to show you the pages in a second. Let me just. So each group, we're going to split into our groups again, and each group is going to add a slide here. So if you teach Spanish, this is how Galeria introduces el presente simple y el presente continuo, okay? And these are the activities, really fun. The activities of how students are practicing this skill. So basically what I want you to do, and you see the verb chart here. What I want you guys to do is choose, I don't think you can do both, but just choose el presente simple or el presente continuo and create an activity where you could teach these points in context for heritage speakers. Think about like a heritage one, like the receptive bilinguals that I had. How would you teach it? It could be a short bell ringer. It could be something you already taught, you know, and you want to just share it with your group and see if they agree with it. But basically choose either presente simple or presente continuo. See how they present it and try to think about a more creative way to teach it in context. Does this make sense? Yes? No? Joe?
Yeah, and we have Yan who's
I don't know if
planning
this
for
is a good
Mandarin. I know.
I found this online for Mandarin. I hope this is a good example, but like, how would you teach this in a more in context and fun way? This is the Mandarin example. So it is there. So each group can just add your names, right, to a slide, and it's just one slide because it's something really like a really short activity. It's not a whole lesson. Okay. Preguntas, dudas?
Okay, so at 3:35, she put in the chat the link. Let's make sure everyone can access that. And I'll put this as a shortcut in our drive for session 4. Okay, rooms 1, 2, how many rooms did we have? Did we have like 6 rooms, I think? We lost a few people. Oh,
Maybe 5, just in case.
yeah.
I'm gonna jump from group to group this time for sure.
Okay, I'll open the rooms again. Would anyone like to articulate what we're doing, what you're going to do now?
We are going to design an activity to teach grammar in a very dynamic way. Maybe we can teach grammar, but not in an implicit way, but maybe not in an explicit way, but in an implicit way. That way they can repeat a pattern, reinforce and practice the grammar, and with something that makes sense.
And Judy, is it a lesson or just a short activity?
Just a short activity, no a lesson.
Okay. Okay.
Did I say a lesson? Sorry.
Perfecto.
No, just because I don't want you guys to feel overwhelmed. It's just a short, like think about a bell ringer or a short activity, okay? All right, we have about 12 minutes and then we'll come back. And we'll just really quickly share what we came up with, okay?
Okay, I'll open the rooms again, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Never enough time, but.
So my first question is, if your students were already producing el presente simple, el presente continuo, would we do this lesson? Would we do this activity? What do we think? If they're already producing it and they're doing a great job, and you have a textbook that says, enseña el presente simple, el presente continuo. Y aquí está cómo se enseña. Would you guys teach it or can you skip it if they're producing it and doing a great job? You can skip it. You can still practice it.
Skip it.
Yeah, like if you have the time, we can, do something fun like you guys created. But if they already produce it and you don't have the time, just move on, right? Okay, but is there a
Question.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I wonder if it's also worth being explicit too, like if you have the textbooks and everything and say, actually, you'll see in the textbook, there's a direct lesson on presente simple, but I know that you can write this way. I hear that you speak this way. And I'll expect you to use this in your reading, writing, and speaking, whatever. And then it'll probably come up like if there are certain students who, I mean, I wouldn't think presente simple, anyone would mess up, but I don't know.
Yeah, and then it also like reaffirms that they already know how to do something in the language. So we don't have to spend time on this because you already have the skill. So we're gonna move on to the next activity, right? Like it also creates some sort of pride as well. I don't know if there's there's a lot of really cool ideas, but one specific group that would like to share like in a minute, the activity that you guys came up with.
And Carla has her hand up too.
Oh, Carla, sí. Did you have a question, Carla?
Sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I was just gonna say that, also like if the students already know it, one thing you can do is just create an anchor chart where it's like, okay, este es el presente simple, this is what it is, this is an example, 2 examples, and put it like on an anchor chart and just put it up for anyone who's like, maybe you have someone joining your class, you know, in November, and you know, they don't know, you know, you can just say like, this is what we've, you know, learned or reviewed. This is what, you know, students already know how to do. And it serves as like as a reminder for anyone who's like lacking in certain skills or just doesn't feel as comfortable. And it reminds them of like, what's it called and how to identify it. I don't know. It's a
I
thought.
like that idea, and I don't know why as you were speaking, I thought about memes. Like, I don't know, like if you do it with memes, like the anchor charts with someone that like a famous actor or like singer, and like, I don't know, make it funny in a way, but also
Yeah.
get access to that vocab. Like, I think that would be really cool. And if
Yeah,
even if
just
yeah.
identifying like what it is, like because they don't know on their own, right? Like I know I didn't know.
Yeah.
Just as English speakers don't know the grammatical terms for like a lot of you know, what they're writing already, but just so that it's like a visual reminder.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
And is there a volunteer to share? I know this was like a wild assignment. Create an activity in like I said 12 minutes and we really gave you like 8 minutes, so I completely understand that it was like not gonna happen. Like most of you guys weren't gonna finish, but is any groups wants to share really quickly what they came up with? If not, we can
We
move on.
can share
Okay, go ahead. Which one's yours, Judy?
quehaceres de la casa. I don't remember.
If you close out your presentation mode, Nancy, and then go back, you'll see that ours shows up on slide 5.
Okay.
It wasn't there right before.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, our idea was to show pictures, real pictures of people, different people in our countries, in the Hispanic countries. So we are not going to explain the use of how you create the continuous, but we have to ask the question repeatedly also. So ¿qué están haciendo? So we make like a little bit explicit in that way. Not the grammar explanation, but just we repeat the pattern. So when they have the different kinds, the different pictures, they're going to say, número 1, está pelando el plátano, está lavando la loza.
Sí.
So in that way, they repeat the pattern. So that's where they can learn the grammar in an implicit way.
Yeah.
So we wanted to include different pictures of different cultures so they can get connected to that. And after the activity, they can share, oh, where in which country people do really peel the plátanos next to the house, like something like that. So, okay, so maybe they can connect, maybe in República Dominicana, like maybe in, my family, we have done this, we have done this. So that is another activity where they can connect in a culture with the culture and they can share.
Thank you. And I really like, I know we're running out of time, but I think like for any, like just moving forward for any like curriculum you're using, any book you're using, you can do something like this, do a bell ringer and collect the data first. Like, do they need it? Are they producing it? If they're producing it, focus on the cultural part, right? They don't just move kind of move on. And if they need it now, you know, okay, I have the data, my students need it, more than half the class needs it, right? I need to address this and sort of do it that way. I saw Tamalala too, and I'm really interested in, but we don't have time to go through it. But I like the themes that you guys are coming up with that are very like student centered, right? So I think I have like 1 minute, but I did want to share one last thing, and I have to stop sharing for some reason. Let me see. Is it gonna let me show you? The last thing I wanted to share is like why this is important, right? Like why we shouldn't focus so much on grammar, but more on like some of you guys are saying, like the culture and like teaching them about different, not only varieties, but different
You're mute.
Nancy, you just muted.
I just muted myself, right? I don't know how much you guys heard from what I was saying, but I'll just kind of wrap up by saying, you know, that the reason why I think this is so important is because if you don't focus so much on grammar, you can focus more on those other literacy skills, right? And I will really quickly, I'm not going to do this slide justice, but I always remember about my student Abraham, who was a long-term English learner, right? So like in high school, he was still classified as an English learner, and he disliked writing. Like he did not like writer. He didn't identify as a writer. And we had, in the level he was in, he had to write an essay. And it was an argumentative essay, and he's like, I don't know how to do it. He wouldn't turn it in. And then one day I asked him to stay after school so we can work on it. And he's like, it's because writing is boring. But I knew that he played banda. He was in a group. So I said, okay, like, let's think about banda. Like, which are the two bandas that are like, you know, that they don't get along right now, or like that you think are like, one is good and one is not. And I can't remember right now which ones, but I asked him, and then I'm like, okay, so like now tell me 3 points of why this one's better than the other, or something like that, right? Like, so then you can make an argument. So now just think about how would you like back up that evidence, right? And like we had to sit there a couple of days and think about it and talk about it. And I remember him telling me like, Profe, like the time that we spent has helped me with my English essays now too, because like now I know what a thesis is. I know how to write, you know, I know what an argument is. I know how to back up my arguments. Did he get an A in the essay? No, I'm not going to say that he became, you know, but like he passed and he was able to complete it because it related to something, you know, like there was a hook there. So if I would have told him like, you have to use a perfect grammar and you have to know, you know, it was like the content, right? If that makes sense, focusing on the content and figuring out what is the student like, so I can not necessarily make him fall in love with writing, right? But so he can do the assignments, and then he could hopefully transfer into his English skills, specifically for his case, right? So you guys have that sort of power in your hands, right? Like you can either break the students or make them, right? Like you can help them. Everything you're teaching them in your Spanish language arts class is going to transfer to their English language arts class, and it's going to help heritage speakers and English learners, right, to be academically successful. So it's really about bridging the home knowledge and the school knowledge, right, together, and the Spanish knowledge and with the English knowledge. So yeah, I think we don't have that much time anymore, so I'm gonna kind of skip this, but thank you, muchos thank yous for letting me be here in community with you, to also learn alongside you and just share a little bit about what I've been doing and some of the work that I do in my class. So I'm gonna let Jill have the last. No, there's no minutes left, Jill.
The last negative.
Go ahead, Jill.
Jill, you're muted.
Okay, great. Thanks for the last negative minute. Okay, so basically, this was amazing. Thank you, muchísimas gracias, Nancy, and to Kim for the first 2 sessions. And so basically, I'll send a follow-up tomorrow. A lot of you also probably just received, we have 2 PDs tomorrow. If you're registered for the 8:30 to 11 one, you should have received all the logon information. And one of the things here though, so sign up for coaching sessions. She has a finite number of hours that she needs to complete by June 30th for this fiscal year. And so the Calendly link, thank you for making yourself available so many times. Pick one that works for you. Be there as a team. And then actually, okay. And yeah, can you refresh that actually, Nancy,
Yes.
because I changed the slide a little bit. Okay, so that last slide. So the other 2 things are that I'm working on a at a glance document to help families understand what a heritage program is, because that came up this year that like the families didn't understand what's this course. He has a lot more homework. He's interviewing me a lot, like to help them understand it. So working on that. And then you need to assess your students. We really need to think about, okay, which grade are you thinking of? So if you're thinking of 9th grade, for example, how are you looking at incoming 9th graders? Do you have a list? What kind of assessment are you going to give them? And an example that I have is really just a Google form with a few writing prompts in it and like a Google voice number or some way they can record themselves speaking, because you really want to get a sense of where they are. Think about those plant levels. How can they write? How can they speak? Maybe you have 50 or 40 students you're looking at, and then you pick 25 or 30 of them for that first class. It's going to be a little messy the first year, right? But you think about students who have a connection to the language, have really excelled in lower levels. And so that's something you can talk through in your coaching session, okay? So I will put the link to the CTLE in the chat. It's the same as the one from last session, Patrina. I feel like I owed you an email, sorry. So you can just complete this twice. I'll send a follow-up email and everything. So just thank you. Yeah, I echo Melissa's thank you and just everyone. I'm so excited for your students. So just thank you for all of this. Yep.
And if I could just really quickly say, like for the coaching sessions, you don't have to do anything but show up. Like it's literally just us talking through your like school context, your plans, and just me giving you any resources that I have to help you plan this summer. So you don't have to do any homework, none of that. You literally just book it, and it's just like a conversation about how we can help you meet the needs of your students.
Yes, and this reminds me too, in addition to you'll assess your students, I will set up time to hear from Vista Higher Learning about Galatea, so you get a sense of that. And then there was something else, 158 we'll meet about the Chinese. I know there was something else I'm forgetting right now, but yeah, okay. We'll be in touch via email. Please read my email. I try not to, I know they're long. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Thank
Jill,
you so
is it
much,
possible
Nancy.
to stay on the
Bye.
call for a minute? I have a question for you.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Joel, you mentioned
Judy? Yeah, go ahead.
you said there's two sessions tomorrow?
Yeah, so yeah, tomorrow's a big PD day. They also have the remote learning tech check, which is conflicting with PDs, but there is a PD 8:30 to 11 that I'm having for world language teachers. I can manually add you, although registration closed.
No, I already did register.
You registered?
But I received the email.
Well, then you're not registered because I sent it out multiple times. So if you did not just receive an email,
An email. I did receive an email today for tomorrow, for that one.
J Matthias 9, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you should have received, yeah, I sent emails today.
Yeah, I did. What's the second one?
Oh, the other one's for administrators, actually.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
okay.
okay, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.